Welcome to a few minutes of reflection. I wanted to look at John chapter 4 because I think there is a point of view that we can take away from Jesus' episode at the well with the Samaritan woman that possibly applies to us in our setting and what we're dealing with today. So John chapter 4 is where I'll be. I'm not going to be reading extensively from it or anything of that nature. Just pulling some thoughts, a few thoughts out, that's all. Hopefully this is a nice, simple lesson that we can meditate on and think about this week. Most of us are already familiar with the passage in John chapter 4 with respect to Jesus at the well. It says in verse 1, I'm scrolling to it in my Bible here, so give me just a second. He says John says in verse 1, "Now when Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John, although Jesus himself did not baptize but only his disciples, he left Judea and departed again for Galilee. And he had to pass through Samaria. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, and near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well, and it was about the 6th hour." If you look at other translations, you might say less literal. It's interesting how that they read on Jesus sitting there. In verse 5, for example, it says, I'm reading from the Good News translation. Verse 5 is where I'm at. "In Samaria he came to a town named Sychar, which was not far from the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by the journey, sat down by the well." It was about noon. Interesting that, a little more literal translation will say it was the 6th hour. That's literally what it's saying. But for most people, that doesn't necessarily mean very much. And so these kind of translations can be handy in that they'll give you a little bit better feel for what some things mean. Like the 6th hour meant that it was around noontime. And it's interesting that it depicts Jesus as being worn out from the journey. The New Living Translation does the same thing, and in verse 5 it says, "Eventually he came to the Samaritan village of Sychar near the field that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired from the long walk, sat wearily beside the well about noontime." And I bring this up in that I think it helps us to transpose ourselves into the moment. I don't know on a hot summer day if you've been out around midday having to walk somewhere and the tiredness that you feel from such a journey. If you can kind of conjure that up in your mind and to give you a sense of the situation here, and it's interesting how this translation, the New Living Translation, says that tired from the long walk, sat wearily, just sat down as he was. He was tired. We would say in a little more colloquial kind of language, he flopped down by the well. Not that he laid out, but he was tired and sat down. I don't know. I say all this to try to make it real and a little more picturesque for us. Sometimes I think we conjure up this vision of Jesus with this aura around him, and that he's always calm and cool, and everything's just so. And here we have a picture of probably a sweaty, tired man sitting down, maybe groaning a little bit as he sat because he's tired. He's been walking a long ways. His disciples, as we know from the rest of the story, went on ahead and went on in. He didn't even follow him into town. They went in to get food. We're going to bring it back. Tired, hungry. And here comes this woman. And it's interesting. I don't know what was in his mind. His setting was just a normal, hot, tired, weary, sitting down kind of setting. I wonder what he saw. I wonder what he thought. I wonder what he felt when the woman came walking up. I can't help but think that he saw opportunity. When he asked for a drink, was it planned what this was going to lead to? Did he ask for a drink just simply because he was thirsty and really had no idea where it was going to lead to? I don't know what he chose to know. I don't know what he chose to foresee. I don't know how him and the Father communicated all of these things. And there's times when it says he knew their thoughts, or he knew what was going on, and knew things that we normally can't know. What did he know about this woman? Well, once he began to focus on her, and whether it was immediate, whether when he sat down at the well, he already knew all that was supposed to transpire, I don't know. But once he fixed his gaze on her and asked for that drink of water, here we go. And I really want to, he's going to lead her to God. And we could focus here on Jesus. And this is going to sound a little strange. I really kind of want to focus on the woman, because I think she's more like us at this moment. And here's what I want to get at. He asked for a drink. I don't know her expression. I'm sure she looked at him strangely, because Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. It was some bad blood between them. They weren't going to be speaking normally. And here and on top of that, she's a woman, and so in those days, even more strange that they would speak like this. But she had no idea that God was speaking with her at that moment. And I can't help but relate to that so many times in just day-to-day routine, she's coming down to draw water. It's hot. Here's a guy sitting there at the well. He's probably hot, sweaty, and dirty looking. He's just a guy. He's of a race. He's a Jew. I'm Samaritan. I'm a woman. He's a man. We're not going to have anything to do with one another. I'm going to ignore him. Who knows what all was in her mind. But I guarantee you, what wasn't in her mind is that God himself was about to talk with her, and that's who she was looking at. A lot of times we have blessings that come our way that we just are blind to. She had a private conversation with God. I mean, what a blessing. She had no idea, but what a blessing. The way the story reads, what she probably thought at first was, here's some strange guy, a Jew, that's first of all talking to me. Secondly, he talks about this living water, which I think probably in her mind was the idea of running water. He's talking about he could give her living water, and she goes, in her mind, I'm thinking, but Jacob, our forefather, he had to dig a well in this hot spot. Are you saying you're better than him? You can do better? I have a sneaky suspicion she didn't have a real high opinion of him. And yet it keeps dawning on me as I read the text and think about it. She's talking to God and has absolutely no idea. Of course, he leads her down the path of coming to the realization, really, of who he is. In one of the few instances, he plainly states, I'm the Messiah. To this woman, he just tells her straight out. Interesting, two things, and this is that was all just to kind of set up things. There's two parts of this story where Jesus says something that I think drives home something for us to think about today in our little meditation on all of this. When he said, all who drink this water will thirst again, but, and he goes on, the water that I will give you, you'll never thirst again. It's interesting to me that he talks about spiritual things, and the people with whom he's speaking are almost constantly driven to only think about physical things. She's thinking water. She's thinking, I don't have to come to the well anymore. She's thinking buckets and opinion of some guy that's sitting here who shouldn't even really be taught. Her mind is everywhere on physical things now. And God is talking to her about things that are so much deeper than that. A little later, and we can't say, maybe you would expect that from a strange person out of this little town that really had no idea who she was talking to. I mean, absolutely none. The disciples, you might think, well, they'll fare better because they've been exposed. They've seen him. They've talked with him. They know kind of sort of who he is. They're learning. But it's no better with them either. If you remember a little bit later, they come, she leaves. They don't even bother to ask why you're talking to her. They just try to encourage him to eat. They know how tired he is. And he says, I have food to eat that you know nothing about. And they're looking around like, well, who gave him food? We just went into town. They also have no idea. They're about as blind and thinking of physical things and of literal food, and the spiritual side of things they don't seem to see. Their minds don't immediately go there. It takes a lot of prompting on the part of Jesus to get them to even go in that direction. And that's what I want to go to in thinking about now. There's an overused term that that I'm hearing. We're in unprecedented times. I mean, how many times have we heard that here of late? And we are. I mean, I'm not wanting to be critical. We are. I've never been in anything like this. This is strange. But what do we see? Are we sitting at a well tired from a journey? By the way, this journey we're still engaged in. Do we see opportunity? Are we seeing spiritual things, or are we only thinking, looking, and seeing the physical side of everything? I could ask, what food in all of this, day in and day out that we're going through, what food has God given you to eat? Jesus said, I have food to eat that you don't know about. And he's referring to the reaching out to this woman and the Samaritans that were about to come his way. Maybe they were on their way, and if you raised up your eyes at that moment, you could see them coming. Maybe that's a setting there that when he said that, I don't know for certain, but what is it that we see? And I'd like to encourage us to think about some hidden blessings in all of this. And maybe we can see the spiritual side of these unprecedented times. For example, I've been hearing a lot of people are spending more time with their family. And I think that's a wonderful blessing from God. I mean, we're kind of stuck in our homes. We're nervous even when we go to the store. Even when we do, we're wearing masks, or we look like a bunch of people about to rob one another. But yet, just the other day, I was engaged in an email with somebody, and they talked about how that they're learning to spend time with their family now. Because used to, they were always gone sports and this practice and that practice and running here to go to this gathering and that gathering, and now none of that. And all of a sudden, they're just at home with each other. Frankly, I believe there's some spiritual things to see there, opportunities. You know, if the disciples had been at the well and Jesus had gone into town and the woman came, they probably would have said nothing to her. Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. But that's not how the Lord saw opportunity. He led her to God in a very common setting of heat and sweat and dustiness and thirst. And in that, he sees spiritual food. He sees spiritual opportunities. That's what I think we need to see in these times now that we are going through each day. So more time with family. Another thing is converse with others. Someone may say, well, you can't get out. Yeah, there is a little used app on our phone. It's called the phone, where you actually talk with, you can text, fine, text if you want, but just dial the number, hear the voice, connect with people. There are benevolent opportunities in our school system. We're giving out thousands of meals each week to make sure kids are getting the food that they should get. And up at church, we are giving out food and working. So don't forget to keep supporting us at the church and continue with your contributions and don't neglect all of that. Because there's a lot of benevolent opportunities going on. On top of that, just keeping up, paying the bills and things too, they don't stop. But I really think there's a lot of opportunities now for us to reach out and to serve people who have needs during all of this. And finally, one last thing to wrap this up. We're stuck at home, many of us. So what better time is there to actually sit down and write a card to somebody and put it in the mailbox? Of course, we've got Zooming. Oh, we're having Zooming meetings every which way. Even for church, who would have ever thought that we'd be meeting electronically? Emails, obviously, in so many other ways that we too can reach out to others. We might not say, give me a drink, but however the conversation starts, hopefully we can see the spiritual opportunities and lead people to better places, to God. May God bless us as we meditate and think on His Word and how it applies to us in our lives.